The sky above the old switchback line was a slow-burning bruise of violet and rust. Evening crept across the dust like a careful apology, soft and slow, brushing against the brittle grass and the iron-stiff rails that hadn't carried a train in a decade. Wind moved through mesquite with the hush of memory, and from the hilltop Cullen McRae could see all the way to where the tracks met the bones of a collapsed water tower, like a rib cage resting in the dirt. He didn't come up here often. The land was mostly good for snakes and ghosts, but something had tugged him off course that afternoon. A restlessness in the way his horse twitched under the saddle, or maybe the way the breeze smelled like wood smoke and something sweet rotting. Cullen walked the last stretch on foot, reins slack in one hand, rifle slung across his back just in case. The track curved out of sight near the station's remains, 4 stone steps, a caved-in bench, and the leaning bones of a telegraph post. And there, beneath what looked like a patchwork tarp, were 2 shapes that could have been bundles of rags, or bodies. He stopped. Wind bit gently at the back of his neck. They weren't moving. Not much. Cullen's boots made no sound in the dirt as he drew near, careful not to cast a shadow across them. The tarp was stiff with dust and poorly tucked, half covered by dry weeds. One figure was smaller, curled in tight. The other was long-limbed, thin, an elbow sticking out at an unnatural angle. A girl maybe 9. Her dress hung off her like it belonged to someone else. Just as he crouched, her eyes opened. Gray, clouded, unblinking. "If we breathe loud," she whispered, her voice rasping from somewhere deep and forgotten, "they get mad." The wind dropped. Cullen didn't speak. He didn't ask who they were. He just reached forward, slow as sunrise, and eased back the edge of the tarp. The smaller one was still asleep, or pretending. Her lips moved faintly, soundless. Pale arms cradled her own knees, and her bare feet were blistered, skin cracked like dry creeps. The older one watched him with a look that made something ache in his chest. Not fear. Worse. Expectation. She expected him to hurt them. Instead, Cullen stood. His boots crunched softly as he stepped back. Then he knelt again, set aside his rifle, and said the only thing he could think of. "I got bread in my saddlebag. Soft. Still warm." The girl didn't move. "I'll sit right here," he added, settling in the dirt beside them. "You don't gotta go nowhere." 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The sun dropped like a coin into the horizon. Coyotes called out, distant and hungry. Eventually the older girl moved, a single nod. Not to him. To her sister. Like giving permission to live. By the time he carried them to the horse, neither made a sound. The smaller one had not opened her eyes. The older one kept a hand on her the whole ride back, as if letting go would bring the nightmare back. The trail home twisted through cottonwood and dry fence line, past thornbrush and the old sheep barn he hadn't used since Beth died. He didn't speak. Neither did they. But somewhere between mile 2 and 3, the older girl pressed her face into his back. Not like she trusted him. Like she'd run out of places to be afraid. It was dark by the time they reached the cabin. He lit one lantern, no more. Shadows clung to the edges of the walls. The cabin was clean but not lived in, wood polished but dry, curtains faded but never replaced. A woman's shawl still hung by the door. Beside it, a cracked mirror and a nail with nothing on it. He set the smaller girl on the cot and brought water in a bowl, soap left untouched since the spring rains. The older girl wouldn't undress in front of him, but she let him hand her a cloth. He placed clean rags, an old comb, and the warm heel of the bread on the table. Then he stepped outside and waited. He looked up at the sky, where stars began to scatter like a trail leading home. Somewhere behind him he heard a bucket tip, then slow, quiet chewing. He didn't turn around. Cullen McRae hadn't asked a question in 5 years that didn't matter. These girls looked like questions no one had bothered to answer. He came in after the bread was gone. The girls sat side by side on the cot, legs dangling, eyes too wide. They hadn't spoken again. But they hadn't run either. "I got more blankets," he said. "Storm might roll through tonight." They didn't reply. But the older one blinked slowly and it felt like permission. He spread the blankets on the cot, then moved to the fireplace. The embers had died low and he stoked them carefully, letting orange glow spill into the room like breath. The younger girl watched the flames as if they might bite. He caught the way her fingers curled each time they snapped. "She's afraid of fire?" he asked gently. The older girl finally spoke. "She don't talk." He looked at her. "You got names?" She shook her head once. "Not no, but not yes either." "Don't gotta tell me if it don't feel right," he said. "Names'll come when they're ready." They watched him. Both of them. Like they were still waiting for something to crack open and go wrong. He reached for Beth's old rocking chair, pulled it near the fire, and sat. His bones ached from the ride. His hands smelled of ash and horse and bread. He leaned back and closed his eyes. Behind him, the girls whispered to one another. He heard only snippets. He didn't even. But what if he? Don't look like them. That night, they slept near the hearth. He didn't push them toward the cot again. Just left the blankets folded and a second lantern lit low. He stayed awake long after they slept. The wind knocked once on the shutters. The old boards creaked like an old voice trying to say something worth hearing. And Cullen, who had once dug a grave in this very yard with nothing but his hands and regret, thought he might just be witnessing something be born again. He didn't know what. Morning came gray and silent. The girls were still curled in their makeshift bed, breath light, bodies pressed close like they were still braced for punishment. Cullen stepped outside to fetch wood and saw hoofprints, deep ones, near the back fence. They hadn't been there the night before. A rider had passed through. Or stopped. He felt a tightness grip his chest, the kind that never came from weather. Back inside, he brewed chicory, cracked eggs into a pan. The scent brought the older girl up on her elbows. "Your mama cook?" he asked. She blinked at him. "Sometimes." He nodded. "Mine too. Used to burn the edges so we knew it was hers." The girl tilted her head, puzzled, but her mouth twitched slightly. It wasn't quite a smile. He set a plate near them and stepped back. They ate without speaking. Then the older one said carefully, "You gonna send us back?" "To who?" She shrugged. He answered slowly, "I don't send strays anywhere, till they stop running. She chewed for a long while. Then, we weren't running. We were hiding. Outside, the sky thickened with a storm that never came. After the dishes were cleared, Cullen went to the shed. Found an old doll Beth had stitched, its dress fraying, one eye missing. He brushed it clean and set it on the table beside the comb. Neither girl touched it. But the older one looked at it long and hard, like memory and grief were playing tug-of-war in her chest. Later, when he came in from chopping kindling, he found the doll resting on the cot. Its hand was now tucked in the younger girl's. He almost smiled. Until a knock sounded at the door. 3 slow raps. Firm. Measured. Cullen moved to the window. The man standing there wore a tan duster and a badge. Sheriff Banner. Cullen opened the door but didn't invite him in. "Morning, McCrae," the sheriff said. "Heard tell you got company?" Cullen said nothing. The sheriff looked past him. 2 girls matching a description came through a few nights ago. Neighbor boy saw them near the tracks. Said one was bleeding. Cullen's jaw twitched. "They ain't yours." "They ain't yours either." The wind picked up. Sheriff Banner's mouth curved faintly. "You watch yourself. Town's got eyes. And ears. And a long memory when it comes to secrets." He tipped his hat and walked off. When Cullen closed the door, both girls were staring at him. Not scared. Waiting. He picked up the fire poker. Stoked the embers again. And as the flames stirred back to life, the older girl finally asked, "Why ain't you scared of them?" Cullen didn't turn. "I buried the only thing I was scared of, little miss," he said. "And she still talks to me more than most." The girl nodded slowly. Then lay down beside her sister. Outside, clouds gathered like thoughts unspoken. And Cullen sat by the fire, whispering low to no one at all, "Beth, I think they're gonna stay." The wind had teeth that morning, sharp and dry, carrying with it the faint scent of dust and iron. The sun hadn't fully risen, yet the light that spilled across Cullen's small patch of earth was harsh, like truth with no softening edge. He stood on the porch, coffee cooling in his hand, watching the girls through the warped window pane. They hadn't said more than a dozen words since the night he brought them in. Even then, it was mostly the older one speaking in small, rationed phrases, just enough to survive another day. Inside, the cabin breathed slow. The smaller girl, the one who hadn't spoken, sat cross-legged on the rug, lining up buttons she'd found in a drawer. The older one watched him like folks watch rivers after flood, grateful it's quiet but not trusting the silence. Cullen opened the door and stepped in, letting the cold air follow him. "I've got an old coat might fit you," he said. "Needs stitching though. You know how to sew." The older girl looked down at her lap. "Not good. You'll learn." Beth did. He paused. "My wife." The girl didn't ask what happened to her. She didn't have to. Death hung on Cullen like old tobacco smoke, soaked in part of him. He set the coat beside her and crouched down, eye level. "Don't need to be perfect. Just needs to hold." Pause. Then she nodded once. The kind of nod that said she was still here, for now. "Been thinking I should call you something," he added gently. "Can't keep saying little miss and the other one." The girl didn't answer. I could guess, he offered. You look like a Ruth, or maybe a Mabel. She was my aunt. Mean as a mule, though. A flicker of something, humor or hurt, passed through her eyes. Ain't our names anymore. He tilted his head. You give 'em up? No, she said, barely above a whisper. They got taken. Cullen didn't ask how. Some things didn't need to be dragged into daylight to be understood. He simply nodded, stood, and moved to the stove. The room filled with the smell of eggs sizzling in lard. Behind him, the buttons clicked softly on the floor as the younger one rearranged them again and again. Does she have one? He asked after a moment, not turning around. The girl hesitated. She did. And now? She don't answer to it. Cullen glanced back. The girl had stopped arranging buttons. She was watching the door like she expected someone to knock again. He brought over a plate, set it between them. She answered to June? He asked gently. The older girl looked up at him. Her mouth twitched again, the ghost of a smile trying to surface. That was her middle one, she said. Before Mama said we weren't daughters no more. June then, Cullen said softly. Just so I got something to whisper when I'm talking to the fire. He didn't press for the older girl's name. Some names, he understood, had to come back slow, like a song you forgot you used to love. The next few days passed like a river frozen in spring, still on the surface, restless underneath. Cullen went about his chores, keeping close enough to be near but never so close the girls flinched. He repaired the barn door, rest-tacked the feed, cleaned the storm windows. All the while, the girls made quiet maps of the cabin. What creaked, what could be touched, where the shadows landed at dusk. One afternoon, he left out a small journal with blank pages and a charcoal pencil, placing it near their bedding. That evening, when he came in from cutting wood, he found a page torn out and folded once. Inside, 2 stick figures and a smaller one, all standing on a hill. No names. Just the word safe written in a shaky hand. He didn't ask who drew it. The next morning, the sky cracked open with rain. Real rain, the kind that stung your ears and dug into the earth like penance. Cullen opened the door to let the smell in, and the younger girl, June, ran to hide under the table. The older girl stood still, trembling, eyes wide. She thinks it's him, she said. When it rains. Cullen closed the door slow. Who? She didn't answer. Instead, she turned and walked to the fire, arms wrapped tight around herself like a shawl made of old wounds. You ever been scared of thunder? She asked, voice dry. He nodded. When I was 6, my pa used to shout louder than the sky. After he left, I found I didn't mind storms so much. The girl sat beside the hearth. She don't talk, but she screams in her sleep. Mama used to put salt on her tongue to shut her up. Cullen didn't speak. He let the fire do the talking. Later that night, he brought down a box from the high shelf. Inside were Beth's old keepsakes, ribbons, thimbles, the locket with her mother's picture, and a tiny leather pouch that once held rose seeds. He placed the pouch in the older girl's hand. Beth saved these. Said she'd plant 'em once we had a girl. The girl looked at the pouch like it might burn her. Why give it to me? You look like you could grow something. Given the right dirt. That night, the girls ate 2 full helpings of stew. June even took seconds on bread. Cullen noticed the difference in how she curled her toes, no longer pulled in like a secret. But the morning after, the sheriff returned. He didn't knock this time. Just stood at the fence post, waiting. Cullen met him outside. You heard from the circuit judge? The sheriff asked. No need, Cullen said. The sheriff chewed on a toothpick, eyes scanning the cabin. Town's talking. They don't much like stories without an ending. Cullen crossed his arms. Let him talk. Don't forget who signs your land papers, McCrae. Cullen took a step forward. You forget who dug my wife's grave with his own hands, Sheriff? I don't scare easy. The sheriff tipped his hat. I ain't here to scare. I'm here to remind. We got law and we got order. If those girls are what I think they are, they're children. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. Then they'll need placing. Properly. Cullen didn't answer. He just stood there, the rain beating off his hat, unmoving. The sheriff left in silence, but the warning stayed behind like smoke. Inside, the girls were huddled by the window. They'll take us, the older one said flatly. Not fear. Just certainty. No, Cullen said. You don't know how they do it. Say it's safe, then chain you with rules. Tell you you're better now, but you're still behind glass. He crouched. Ain't no glass here. She blinked hard. Why were you helping us? He didn't have a good answer, so he gave the true one. You remind me of someone I never got to meet. The girl tilted her head. My daughter. She didn't make it. That quieted the room. Even June looked up, eyes wide. The older girl spoke softly. You ever name her? Beth did. Hope. She nodded and something in her softened. A wall, maybe, or just the way she breathed. That night, she spoke to June by name. Come here, June Bug. The little one ran into her arms. It was the first time Cullen had heard her use the name. Progress came like the thaw, small, wet patches in the frost. Cullen left a small flower pot on the windowsill with a note tucked inside. When you're ready. 2 days later, the pouch of rose seeds was gone from the mantel. That evening, he found a carved piece of wood on his pillow. A clumsy shape. A star maybe. Or a compass. The next time Cullen returned from the town well, he brought fabric, soft cotton in pale blue. Beth would have made a dress from this, he said, laying it out. The older girl touched it reverently. What color would you pick for yourself? He asked. She hesitated. Don't matter. It does to me. She didn't answer. But later he found her sketching flowers in the journal. Lavender, sky blue, and sun-yellow blooms that didn't yet exist outside her mind. One morning she stood at the porch and asked, Can we plant something? He handed her a spade. In the dirt beside the steps they dug. Quietly. June watched, holding a jar of water like it was made of gold. The older girl pressed the rose seeds in, slow and certain. I used to think nothing would grow near me, she said. Everything just turned mean. Cullen met her eyes. So let this be your proof. By nightfall the wind picked up again. Distant thunder growled across the hills. Cullen bolted the shutters and stacked wood by the door. But June didn't hide. She sat in his rocking chair, legs tucked under, holding the button pouch. The older girl stood beside her, one hand resting on her shoulder like a root taking hold. After supper, Cullen took out Beth's Bible and placed it on the table, closed. If ever you want to read, he offered. The older girl looked at it like a relic of a world she used to believe in. We was told we were cursed, she said. You ain't. She looked down. Mama believed it. Said we brought famine then death. Said we weren't daughters. Just reminders. Cullen's voice was steady. Reminders of what? The girl's throat worked. Of him. The words hung like smoke. Heavy. Unspoken for too long. Then June, quiet as a mouse in morning light, said one word. Nell. Cullen turned. The older girl didn't look surprised. Just tired. That was mine, she whispered. Nellie. Cullen stood and gently nodded. Nice to meet you, Nellie. The fire cracked once behind him. And somewhere under the floorboards of the past, something began to heal. The morning was quiet but not kind. The wind had turned sharp, brushing dry leaves across the porch like an old woman sweeping out sorrow. Cullen stood barefoot, coffee in hand, watching the girls chase sunlight through the half-bare trees. June's hair caught the breeze like silk thread pulled from a memory. She was barefoot too, her steps small and careful, while Nellie trailed behind, eyes scanning the horizon more than the ground. They didn't speak, not yet. But they moved differently now. Lighter. Less like fugitives and more like girls. He had begun building a fence. Not for the cattle, he hadn't kept any in 3 years, but around the garden plot, where weeds had once been the only thing that grew. The posts were rough-cut pine, notched and anchored deep, and he drove each one like he was planting a stake into something holy. Nellie watched him from the steps, her arms tucked around her knees. You trying to keep something out? She asked after a while. No, he said, eyes on the line. Trying to keep something in. Something worth keeping. She said nothing, but he saw her jaw shift, like the words settled somewhere beneath her ribs. That evening he cooked beans with sage and flatbread brown just right on the pan. June fell asleep with butter on her chin. Nellie stayed awake longer, staring into the fire, silent and brittle. You ever been somewhere long enough to miss it? He asked. She didn't answer. But when she finally looked up, her eyes were rimmed red. You ever been somewhere too long? She asked back. He nodded. The fence grew taller over the next days. Not high, but wide, spanning the edge of his land where the creek dipped low and snakes liked to sun. The girls helped now. June fetched nails in her apron. Nellie held the level and argued about corners. Beth would have liked you, he said once. Nellie squinted up at him. Why? You don't take things at face value. She used to say women who ask the right questions save more souls than men who preach loud. You talk about her like she's still inside this house. She is. The hammer stilled in his hand. He pressed his palm against a beam and let silence rest between them. They didn't go into town, not after the last time. The trip had been quiet, but the stairs weren't. Miss Ida Bell, with her apron starched sharp as her words, had clucked her tongue the moment they stepped off the wagon. "McCrae," she'd said too loud. "Didn't know you took to fostering." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "They're just passing through," he'd murmured, trying not to draw attention. June had clung to his leg and Nellie stood rigid, her eyes darting between the shop windows like she was looking for exits. "They don't look like kin," Ida had said. "They ain't," he replied evenly. That was the moment everything shifted. The store clerk, who once offered Cullen coffee and salt without charge, rang his bell twice and muttered something about policy. They left with nothing but matches and flour. Back at the wagon, Nellie didn't cry. She just stared at the church steps as they passed, her mouth flat as a blade. "Why do they hate us?" she asked. He didn't answer until they were nearly home. "They don't hate you," he said quietly. "They hate not understanding. And most folks fight what they don't understand." That night, Nellie didn't speak at all. She didn't eat either. The next morning, she was up before him, barefoot in the garden, raking dirt into careful rows. "Gonna need more beans if we stay," she muttered when he stepped outside. It was the first time she'd said "if" out loud. He built a swing between two sycamores. Nothing fancy, just rope and a smooth-down plank that creaked when you sat wrong. June squealed the first time he pushed her, then promptly fell off, then climbed back up. By afternoon, her laughter sounded like it belonged. That night, after supper, Nellie asked if the stars looked different from other places. He thought a moment. "No," he said. "But when you're safe, they shine truer." She nodded, head tilted back. "Mama used to say stars were eyes, watching to see if we were good." She sounds like she was scared a lot. She was. "Were you?" "Still am." He offered her the last slice of pie. She took it without looking at him. Cullen started carving again. Beth used to joke he only picked up a knife when he was avoiding something. That week he carved 2 small chairs, child-sized, sanded soft. He left them by the hearth without saying a word. June found hers first. She ran her hands over the backrest like it was treasure. Nellie didn't sit in hers until the 3rd day. When she did, it was like watching someone step into their own skin again. Then 2 things happened that cracked the quiet wide open. First, a man rode up the edge of the property line. Didn't come close. Just watched. Second, June screamed in the middle of the night. Cullen burst through the door, rifle in hand. But there was no fire. No man. Just June, tangled in blankets, clawing at her own face. She was burning. Nellie sobbed. She said he lit the barn. Cullen knelt, trying to hold her hands still. "June, it's over," he whispered. "You're here. It's done." She didn't calm until Nellie climbed into the cot beside her, pulling her close, rocking her the way a mother would. After the storm of breath and tears, the cabin went quiet again. Cullen sat outside on the porch, knees aching. He could still hear June's screams in his chest. The next morning, Nellie didn't come down for breakfast. June sat at the table, staring at her plate like it offended her. "You don't gotta eat," Cullen said gently. She looked up, then pushed the plate forward and held out the small doll from Beth's box. "She says to fix it," she whispered. "Its arm hurts." He blinked, then smiled. "I'll see what I can do." That afternoon, while stitching the cloth arm with borrowed thread, Cullen heard Nellie sobbing behind the woodshed. He didn't go to her, but he left half an apple where she'd see it. By evening it was gone. The fence was almost done. The post stood strong, the wire was stretched, and the gate swung open without a creak. Cullen watched the sunset pour red light through the gaps, and wondered if this was what redemption looked like, hand-built, slat by slat. Later, Nellie joined him on the porch. "I don't think I believe in heaven," she said suddenly. He didn't answer, just waited. "But I think I believe in fences." He looked at her. "Fences mean someone wants you to stay in," she explained. "That maybe you're worth keeping." "You are." Her voice broke. "Even if I'm broke?" "Especially then." Behind them, June stirred in her chair, humming something soft and tuneless. Cullen breathed deep. "I was going to leave," Nellie said, not looking at him. "When?" "Before you found us. We were gonna walk, till we found a church or a train. I told her we'd hide in a grain sack if we had to." He didn't speak. She said she didn't want to go no more. "Why?" "She likes the fence," Nellie said. "Says it makes her feel closed in but safe." They sat in silence for a while. Then Cullen leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You ever gonna tell me what happened?" Nellie's mouth tightened. Then after a beat she said, "One night Mama didn't come home. A man did. He had the deed to the house and said we were his now. Said it was legal." Cullen's chest went still. "I told him no," Nellie went on. I hit him with a shovel. Her fingers shook. He put us in the barn. Lit it. I dragged her out. I don't know how. Cullen closed his eyes. He said if we breathed wrong again he'd find us. He said we were cursed. You're not cursed. She looked at him. You're just children. She stood, knees stiff. I don't want to be a child. I just want to be safe. You can be both. Nellie's lips parted like she was going to argue. But June called her name from inside. And she went. That night, Cullen dreamed of fire. But when he woke, the cabin was quiet. The girls were asleep in their chairs, the doll between them, its stitched arm tied with red ribbon. He rose and stepped outside. The stars blinked overhead, soft and slow. He walked to the fence, hand trailing the top rail. On the far side, in the distance where the land sloped down, he saw movement. A rider. Watching. He stepped back inside and reached for his rifle. The fence wasn't high enough for what might come next. The knock came just after breakfast. Not loud but not shy either. 3 taps. Calculated, official. Cullen set down the tin plate and rose without a word. June stopped chewing mid-bite. Nellie shifted instinctively, her arm sliding in front of her sister. He opened the door to find Sheriff Banner standing there, one boot on the bottom step, fingers resting on the belt near his holster, not drawn, not relaxed. Morning, the sheriff said. I'll come straight. Got word from Hollis County. There's a warrant issued for a man named Price Huxley, accused of trafficking kin. You seen him? Cullen kept one hand on the doorframe. Name don't ring. Heard he might have passed this way. Looking for 2 girls that got out. Girls? Cullen repeated evenly. Don't play dumb, the sheriff said. Town's already boiling over. Folks want answers. You've been off the books too long. The wind stirred the hem of the sheriff's coat. It smelled like scorched tobacco and dust. I don't owe the town my home, Cullen replied. Only my own conscience. Banner gave a cold smile. That may be. But law's still law. And if those girls came here, if you're harboring fugitives, well, even the good-hearted have to answer for that. Behind Cullen, the floor creaked. He turned slightly enough to block the doorway. They're not fugitives. They're children. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. You keep acting like they're yours. Cullen's voice dropped. I never said that. No, Banner said softly. But they look at you like you are. The man tipped his hat. Don't let this become a legal matter, McCrae. You've suffered enough. When the dust settled behind the sheriff's horse, Cullen stood a long while in the doorway, one hand curled into the frame. The wood groaned quietly as if absorbing the weight of something not spoken. Inside, Nellie stared at him, her body coiled tight. You said we were safe. You are. They'll take us. Not if I'm standing. She crossed her arms. You can't stop the law. He met her gaze. Then I'll slow it down. That night the fence felt too low. The gate too open. The shadows too wide. Cullen sat on the porch, sharpening his knife without urgency. The steady rasp of metal on stone was the only sound between stars. Nellie emerged quietly, her arms crossed tight against the cold. You trust him? She asked. The sheriff? She nodded. I trust him to be exactly who he is, Cullen said. She sank onto the top step beside him, her knees pulled up. You trust us. I didn't know trust needed saying out loud. She exhaled. We've lied. About some things. I figured. You don't want to know what? He looked at her, eyes kind but steady. You'll tell me when you're ready. That's what trust is. Her shoulders relaxed just barely. After a pause, she asked, You think it's possible? Starting over? He thought a moment. Not like a new book, but maybe like turning a page. Nellie nodded, and something unreadable passed over her face, hope with the edges still curled from flame. A week passed. The garden began to sprout. Every morning, June watered the rows with a tin cup, humming as she worked. Cullen found himself moving slower when she did, like he didn't want to scare the moment off. Nellie spent more time in the barn. She claimed she was chasing mice, but Cullen knew better. She was watching, measuring. He let her. One evening, he found her sitting atop the hayloft, feet dangling, gaze pointed west. You think they'll come? She asked without looking down. I think the world don't give up so easy on things it thinks it owns. She nodded. He said we were property. Like a house. Or a horse. Cullen didn't answer. Just climbed up beside her. He kept papers in a lockbox. Said Mama signed us over. I don't think she knew what she was doing. Grief makes folks blind. She was sick. In her head. Sometimes she looked at us like we weren't even hers. The barn creaked around them, the wind whispering through gaps like it was trying to eavesdrop. "Did you hate her?" Cullen asked. Nellie frowned. "I tried not to. That's more than most ever do." After a long silence, Nellie spoke again, softer. "You buried your daughter?" "I buried a name. We never got to hold her. Beth was the only one who wanted to. She was better at love than me." Nellie looked at him. "You're not bad at it. You just don't know when it's happening." He chuckled softly. "That's likely true." Later that week a letter arrived. Unmarked. No stamp. Folded inside, a warning. "He's coming. Not alone. Sunday." Cullen didn't show the girls. He hid it under the floorboard near Beth's chair and sat outside longer than usual, oiling the rifle. He taught Nellie how to light the lanterns without burning her fingers. Showed June how to use the bell if someone knocked and he wasn't home. None of it was said aloud, but it hung between them like smoke. On Friday night, Nellie found him in the barn. She carried something wrapped in old cloth, Beth's Bible, the pages dog-eared and water-stained. "I want to give this back," she said. He turned surprised. "Why?" "Because I want to start with something that's mine." He took the book, laid it down gently, and handed her the carved star he'd kept in his pocket. "You already did." Saturday passed slow. Cullen rode into town and left with more nails, 2 tin cups, and an odd look from the clerk. No one spoke to him except Ida Bell, who nodded once from behind her porch railing. "You keep them girls safe," she said. "Even if they ain't yours." He nodded, unsure if she meant it kindly. That evening, Nellie stood at the mirror in the cabin and touched the ribbon in her hair. "She's talking more," she said, watching June out the corner of her eye. "You noticed?" "She's healing," Cullen said. Nellie frowned. "So why do I feel like we're breaking?" "Because tomorrow's Sunday." Her eyes flinched. "You know?" He nodded. A long silence. Then Nellie whispered, "I've dreamed of killing him." Cullen stepped closer. "But you didn't." "No. That's the difference," he said gently, "between what they made you and what you are." Nellie's eyes brimmed. She turned away fast, but he didn't move. She spoke without looking. "What if they take us anyway? Then they'll have to walk through me. You'd get hurt. I've been hurt before. Would you do it even if we weren't yours?" He stepped forward. His voice low. "You are." A breath caught in her throat. Behind them, June snored softly, hugging her doll. The wind picked up. Storms on the edge of the sky. Cullen bent and took a candle from the mantel. "Lit it." "I want you to see," he said, "what light does in the dark." He handed it to her. She held it like something sacred. Then she whispered, "My real name is Eleanor Rose." He met her eyes. "Eleanor," he said, "it suits you." She blinked and the tear finally fell. That night no one slept. Not fully. And just before dawn, hoofbeats stirred dust on the ridge. Cullen stepped outside, rifle slung, eyes on the east. They were coming. The sun rose red, smeared across the sky like a wound that refused to close. Dust lifted ahead of the riders long before their shapes took form, and Cullen McRae stood on the porch, still as timber, his rifle cradled against one arm. The wind carried the metallic tang of tension, like before a storm or a war. 3 men rode up. The one in the middle dismounted first. He wore a black coat despite the heat, the kind stitched for funerals or bad intentions. His smile didn't reach his eyes, and those eyes landed directly on Nellie, who stood just inside the doorway behind Cullen. "You took what was mine," the man said. "I've come to collect." "She was never yours," Cullen said. Price Huxley chuckled. "Her mama signed papers." "I read him," Cullen replied. "A name scrawled in shaking ink don't make you anything but a coward with parchment." Price stepped forward, hand hovering near his holster. "You think that badge behind you's gonna protect you? Sheriff says these girls need proper placement." "I ain't hiding behind law," Cullen said, stepping off the porch. "I'm standing in front of them." The 2 riders behind Price shifted in their saddles, waiting for a signal. June peeked from the window, wide-eyed, her hand wrapped in the hem of Eleanor's dress. "I got rights," Price said. "And papers. And witnesses who'll swear to it." "And I've got 2 girls who breathe easier when you ain't near," Cullen said. "What's that worth, you think? I'll shoot you if I have to. You won't get to them even then." The wind howled sudden and hard, carrying the creak of the fence gate swinging open behind them. Price's hand twitched. Eleanor stepped outside. She didn't run. Didn't scream. Just walked down the porch steps, her back straight, her face like stone freshly cracked. "You lit the barn," she said. Price hesitated. "You locked her in." You told me Mama gave us away like horses. He didn't answer. I dragged her out, Eleanor said. You didn't even check if she lived. I gave you a home, he spat. You gave us a sentence. Her voice didn't tremble. You ain't here to take us back, she said. You're here to make sure we stay afraid. Enough, Price shouted, pulling his pistol. But Cullen was already moving. One shot rang out, not from Price. Cullen's rifle snapped, the butt thudding against his shoulder, and Price's weapon clattered to the dust. The other riders drew but didn't fire. One looked at Price, groaning on his knees, clutching his hand, and nudged his horse backward. I suggest you ride, Cullen said. Before that limp turns to a grave. The men didn't argue. Hoofbeats kicked dust into the morning light, and soon only Price remained, bleeding, staring up at the man who hadn't blinked once. You think they'll stay with you? He hissed. You think they're yours now? Cullen walked toward him, slow and deliberate, stopping just close enough that the shadow of his figure stretched over the man like judgment. I don't own them, Cullen said. I'm just the first person who didn't try to break them. He turned and walked back to the porch. Price didn't follow. The gate slammed in the wind behind him. Back inside, June had crawled beneath the table, her arms over her head. Cullen knelt and waited, saying nothing. When she finally peeked out, he held out his hand. She took it. Outside, Eleanor sat on the steps, her face blank, her body trembling so slightly it might have been the wind. Cullen sat beside her. Neither spoke. Then after a long time she whispered, I thought I'd be braver. You were. No. I wanted to scream. You didn't need to. She folded her arms, holding herself. He looked down, jaw tight. You saved her, he said. That day. The barn. Not many could have. She was all I had. Now you've got more. Eleanor didn't answer. Then Cullen leaned forward, hands shaking, and buried his face in them. And he cried. Not a loud cry. Not a breaking cry. The kind that comes from too long holding in what should have been grieved long ago. He didn't cry when Beth died. Didn't cry when he buried hope. But here, in the silence after fire, he wept. For what he lost, for what they survived, for the space between. Eleanor reached over and set her hand on his shoulder. He didn't flinch. Is it always like this? She asked. Feeling things? He wiped his eyes and gave a half laugh. Only when it's real. She nodded, then stood and walked inside. June was already asleep, curled beneath the rocker with the doll in her arms. Later, Cullen sat by the hearth. The stars had come out, bold and quiet. He carved without thinking, small wooden shapes that weren't anything yet but might be one day. Eleanor stepped out and set a folded blanket on his lap. We're staying, she said softly. He looked up. And she added, if you'll have us. He nodded once, unable to speak. And the fire crackled like a voice saying yes.